The county had a saying about donkeys that Nora had heard approximately once a week since March. A donkey was a poor man's horse. The saying was meant as an insult. Nora had been turning it over in her head since February and had arrived at a different interpretation. In a county where most men were poor, a poor man's horse was exactly what every farm needed. She had read the county extension bulletin in January, the one that ran every year with the farm labor cost data and that she had been reading every year since she was old enough to understand what it was saying. The 1935 bulletin had a section on mechanical versus animal power that she read 3 times and annotated in the margins. At 8 cents a gallon and rising, with supply unreliable in drought years, gasoline was not a farm budget item most operations could sustain. A farm under 200 acres was more economically rational with draft animals than with mechanical equipment for all but the largest single-day harvest work. Mule prices had risen 30% over the previous 2 years as farmers who had sold their draft animals in better times found themselves unable to replace them. She had written in the margin, "Nobody is selling mules. Somebody is selling the ability to make mules." She spent February and March finding out what that somebody looked like and whether she could be it. What she found? A Mammoth Jack stud operation required quality jacks, a reputation built on the quality of mules the jacks produced, and a business model that kept the jacks on the property and generated recurring stud fee income rather than one-time sale income. A proven Mammoth Jack commanded a stud fee of $10 to $25 per breeding. A jack could safely handle 20 to 30 mares per season. 2 jacks in a good established season, $600 or more. More than the wheat had made in either of the previous 2 years combined. The jacks required what large working animals required: quality feed, appropriate shelter, regular hoof care, and correct handling by someone who was not intimidated by an animal that weighed 1,000 pounds and had opinions about things. Nora was not intimidated. She found the jacks in April through a livestock dealer in Hutchinson who was liquidating the estate of a Mammoth Jack breeder who had died in the winter. 4 jacks available. She drove to Hutchinson on a Tuesday and spent 3 hours looking at all 4 animals before she decided. Solomon was 4 years old and 15 hands and 2 inches, 15.2 hands in the notation breeders used, which put him at 62 inches at the shoulder and just over 1,000 pounds of dark gray Mammoth Jack stock, with a black dorsal stripe running from his poll to his tail. His muscle development was what she had come to Hutchinson to see, not the lean athleticism of a horse, but the dense, layered, compact muscle of a draft animal, visible at the shoulder and the hindquarter in a way that made the other animals at the dealer's yard look insufficient by comparison. His eyes were calm amber. His ears, long even by Mammoth Jack standards, were in the forward, alert position of an animal that was interested in the situation rather than alarmed by it. His temperament was correct. An animal this size with a bad temperament was a danger. An animal this size with Solomon's temperament was a working tool of the highest order. Gideon was 3 years old and 15 hands even, dark brown rather than gray, slightly less mass in the shoulder than Solomon, but with a quality of alert attention to his surroundings that told Nora he was the more observant of the two. In a breeding operation, observant animals were easier to manage in the introduction protocols. She noted this. She bought both for $40, $20 each, below the dealer's asking price, because the dealer wanted the estate liquidated and she was the only buyer who had arrived knowing what she was looking at. Before we find out what Nora does with these 2 animals, drop a comment below and tell us what state you're watching from. This channel reaches viewers from all across the country, and we love knowing where our stories are landing. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a good time. We put out new stories every week, and you won't want to miss what comes next. Cal Alderman was at the west fence when she came home with the trailer. He had been at the west fence on Thursdays since April on the pretext of the shared drainage channel that ran along the west property line, resolved adequately in April, attended to with decreasing plausibility every Thursday since. He looked at the trailer. He looked at what was in the trailer. "Big," he said. "Mammoth Jacks." She lowered the trailer ramp. "Solomon and Gideon, 15-2 and 15 hands." He was quiet, with the quality she had come to recognize in him, systematic rather than slow, working through information from the outside in. "Mule breeding," he said. "Stud fee operation. I'm not selling them." She went around to the trailer gate. "Farmers bring their mares here during breeding season. I charge per breeding. The mule foals belong to the mare's owners. My income is the stud fee, the same animals, the same farm, the same income recurring every season." He came to the trailer ramp and looked at Solomon, who was looking back at him with the calm amber eyes of an animal assessing a new situation. "What are you charging?" $12 per breeding for Solomon, 10 for Gideon. He's younger. His fee goes up when his offspring prove out. She unclipped the lead. "Help me get them to the pen." He helped. The pen she had built that spring was correct for animals this size. High rails that Mammoth Jacks required because they could reach over standard fence height. A handling area with room to manage a 1,000-pound animal without being cornered. Shelter that kept the animals dry without trapping heat in summer. She had read everything available on Mammoth Jack management before she built it, and she had built it correctly, which she could tell because Solomon walked into the facility and made one circuit of the pen and positioned himself at the water trough without incident. The county's opinion formed within the week. The opinions were delivered with the specific enthusiasm that Pratt County brought to the unusual decisions of its residents. Most involved the observation that a woman running a stud operation alone was a situation requiring comment, not hostile comment. Pratt County was not hostile, but the particular commenting that small communities performed on things that fell outside their established categories. Others involved the suggestion that tractors were the future regardless of current fuel prices, which was the county's way of saying that whoever was right about the future would be vindicated eventually, and that the weight was not their problem. Walt Hensley at the co-op said he reckoned she'd spend more on feed than she'd make on fees, which was an arithmetic error that assumed feed costs Nora was not paying because she had planted the south field in February specifically to avoid paying them. She did not correct Hensley. Correcting him required explaining the calculation, and the calculation was not Hensley's business. Cal came to the west fence on Thursday with the drainage pretext and looked at the jacks in the pen. "What are you feeding them?" he said. She told him. Alfalfa hay from the south field she had planted in February, grain supplementation proportional to workload, mineral salt access. The feed cost was primarily her own labor and the water the south field needed. "You planted the south field in February," he said, "before you bought the jacks." "When I decided I was going to do this," she said. "You get the feed established before you bring the animals. Otherwise, you're buying feed at market prices while the animals eat into your margin before the first fee comes in." He looked at the south alfalfa field, at the jacks. He went back to the fence post. The first farmer came in late May. His name was Pruitt, from the east section of the county, a different Pruitt from the one in town, and he arrived with a Belgian draft mare of reasonable quality and the expression of a man who was not certain he was doing the right thing, but was doing it because he needed the mule foal the following spring and had no other practical option. He had heard about the operation from the county extension agent, who had confirmed what Nora told him in February, that a Mammoth Jack stud operation in Pratt County was a service the county's draft animal situation required, and that the Holt farm operation was correctly set up and professionally managed. She handled the introduction herself, as she had always planned to. A draft mare and an unfamiliar jack were both large animals with strong opinions, and bringing them into productive contact required the correct sequence. Mare in the handling chute first, Jack brought through the side gate at the right angle, the specific approach and retreat protocol that allowed both animals to assess each other before contact was permitted. She had practiced this protocol with both Jacks for 2 weeks in April before the first commercial booking, every morning until the sequence was automatic for all three of them, her, Solomon, Gideon, and could be executed with the specific, unhurried confidence that large animals required in the people handling them. A handler who moved with uncertainty communicated that uncertainty to the animal, and an uncertain 1,000-pound animal was a management problem she was not going to create. Pruitt watched from the fence rail. When it was done and he was writing out the $12 for Solomon's fee, he said, "You've done this before." "Not with these two," she said, "but I knew what I was doing before I bought them." He took his mare home and told his neighbors, and his neighbor told his, which was how news moved in Pratt County before anyone decided to move it. The second farmer came in June with a Percheron cross. The third came a week later with a standard Clydesdale. By the end of June, she had handled 6 breedings, 4 with Solomon, 2 with Gideon, and the word had moved through the county with the specific velocity of useful information in a drought year. The Holt farm had Mammoth Jacks. The fee was fair. The handling was professional. Your mare came home the same day without incident, and the introduction had been run correctly. Cal was at the fence on the Thursday between the second and third farmers. He had been watching from the west fence on the morning she ran the introduction protocol. She could see him from the handling area, the dark canvas cap visible over the fence rail at the distance that was close enough to be there and far enough not to be in the way, which she had come to understand was the specific distance he calibrated for everything. 6 breedings, he said. 6 through last week. 7th coming Tuesday, a Percheron mare from the Henderson operation. He looked at the fence. A Percheron crossed with Solomon would produce the working animal most county farmers would give a full season's income to own. The Percheron's size and draft power, the Mammoth Jack's legendary endurance, and the Mule's constitutional resistance to colic that killed horses and to the heat exhaustion that slowed them. The Mule from this pairing would work 30 years and outlast 2 horses of equal quality. "What's the fee for a Percheron?" "Same as any other mare, 12 for Solomon." "You could charge more. The Mule foal is worth more." "I know. I'm not going to." She looked at the breeding log. "Variable rates mean farmers can't plan their breeding budgets around me. I'm not the only option they'll ever have. Someone else will set up a competing operation in this county within 2 years when they see what I'm making. Consistent, fair fees build loyalty before the competition arrives. If I price by the mare's breed, I'm optimizing for individual transactions. I'm not here for individual transactions. I'm building a 4-year booking relationship with every farm in a 30-mile radius." He thought about this for a longer moment than most people would have. 4 years, he said. Solomon's prime breeding years run through age 8, Gideon through his 9th year. 4 to 5 years of peak performance from both animals, and by the 2nd year, the offspring of the first season will be working on county farms, and people will be talking about them, which is the advertising that actually moves a booking list. She looked at the alfalfa field. "This isn't a one-season decision." He was quiet. He looked at her with the pale gray eyes and the dark canvas cap, and the expression that was not neutrality but its opposite, the specific full attention of a man who was taking in everything she said and storing it accurately. "Nora," he said, and then stopped. She waited. He went back to the fence post. She went back to the Jacks. By October, she had handled 23 breedings between Solomon and Gideon. Conservative for a first season with 2 new Jacks in a county still learning what she had. $261 in stud fee income, ahead of first-year projection, and on track for the 4-year trajectory she had calculated in February. We're about halfway through this story, and we want to know, have you ever owned a Mammoth Jack or any kind of donkey? Whether you grew up with working donkeys or just have a soft spot for them, tell us in the comments. And if someone sent you this video, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the rest of the story. The 8th farmer of October came through the gate on a Thursday afternoon. Cal was at the west fence. He waited while the mare was handled and the fee was collected, and the farmer drove back down the county road. Then he came to the fence properly. She showed him the breeding log, 23 entries down the page. He did the arithmetic in his head. "Nora," he said. She waited. "The Belgian mare in my west pasture," he said. She looked at him. "You have a Belgian mare?" "Since last spring, my father's. Good conformation, sound. She's been unproductive because I haven't had access to a quality jack." He held her gaze with the pale gray eyes. "I've been at your fence since April on the pretext of the drainage channel." "Which was resolved in April," she said. "Yes." "And you have a Belgian mare in your west pasture?" "Yes," he said, "since last spring." She looked at Solomon in the pen, watching the fence conversation with the amber eyes and the forward ears of an animal that had learned that fence conversations sometimes led to work. "Bring her Tuesday," she said, 7 in the morning, "and come to supper on Sunday. Not about the mare." He was very still. "Not about the drainage either," he said. "Not about the drainage," she said. "Not about the jacks. Just supper." He came at 5:45 on Sunday, which she counted. He brought the Belgian mare on Tuesday at 7 in the morning. Solomon performed correctly. Cal wrote the check, $12, consistent with every other fee, and put it on the fence post. He came back the following breeding season, and the one after that. In the 3rd season, the Belgian mare was the first entry in the spring book, as she had been the previous 2 years. The jacks were not for sale. She had said this since April of the first year, and the answer never changed because the logic never changed. The jacks were the asset that generated recurring income, and selling the asset traded every future season for a single payment. This was not complicated. She did not understand why people kept asking. Cal had not asked. Not once in 3 years of Tuesdays and breeding seasons and Sunday suppers that had expanded into most of the days of the week and taken on a quality that was not only about the farm and not only about the jacks, and which neither of them had needed to explain at length because they had both been paying attention since April of 1935, and both of them arrived at correct conclusions from available evidence, which was, she had come to understand, one of the specific things they had in common. On a March morning in the 3rd year, she was in the south alfalfa field checking the winter stand, the alfalfa planted in February of 1935, now in its 3rd year of production, root system established and dense, reliably productive for another 5 years at minimum, when Cal came across the field from the direction of the farmhouse. From the house, which was where he came from now. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee and walking the alfalfa rows without stepping on the stand, which was the automatic behavior of someone who had been on working farms long enough to know what you did not step on. He handed her the coffee and looked at the notebook she was holding. She told him the booking numbers without being asked. 42 mares for the coming season, 23 with Solomon and 19 with Gideon. He drank his coffee and looked at Solomon in the pen. Solomon was in the morning sun, with the amber eyes half closed and the ears in the relaxed, sideways position of an animal that was comfortable and at rest. Dark gray coat warm in the March light, the black dorsal stripe from pole to tail, the shoulder and hindquarter musculature at the peak of what 3 years of correct management produced. Denser and more compact than what had been there in April of 1935, when she had driven home from Hutchinson with 2 Mammoth Jacks in the trailer and a calculation in the notebook that said this was going to work. Solomon's first offspring were working on 9 farms within 20 miles. Their owners had written in the comment column of the breeding log, "Exceptional pulling power, best working animal on the farm, exactly what I needed." The 4th farm's owner had written nothing but had booked 3 mares for the coming season, which said the same thing more clearly. The fee for Solomon was going to $15 this season. The reputation was established. Cal was quiet for the amount of time he was quiet when something had completed itself. "A poor man's horse," he said. She had been waiting for him to say that since February of 1935, when she had written it in the bulletin margin, not knowing she was writing it for a specific reason or a specific audience. The county said it as an insult, meaning a lesser thing. She had read it as a description of exactly what was needed, meaning what every farm around her was short of and could not afford to replace and could not farm without. 3 years and 64 breedings and 9 farms of proven offspring had not changed which reading was correct. "Yes," she said. "Exactly." They stood in the south alfalfa field and looked at the farm that had been a failing wheat operation in March of 1935 and was, in March of 1938, a stud operation with an established reputation and a booking list that filled months in advance, and 2 Mammoth Jacks who had 4 to 5 years of productive seasons ahead of them and who had never once been for sale and were not going to be. Neither was anything else she had built. The March morning was what it was. 42 bookings for the coming season. A Belgian mare due in February with Solomon's genetics growing inside her. Sunday at 6 o'clock, or 5:45 if Cal was being Cal, which he always was. Some things you worked out from first principles, from a county extension bulletin annotated in January and acted on before the ground thawed. And some things arrived the way good working animals arrived. Reliable, built for the long work, and worth considerably more over time than anyone had understood at the beginning. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you for spending this time with us. Leave a comment below. Tell us about a time you worked with donkeys or mules, or share a memory from a family farm. Your stories are what keep this community alive. Subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you in the next one. She had thought about the county's saying often in those 3 years, "A poor man's horse." The implication was that a rich man's horse, a proper horse, was the better thing, and the donkey was the inferior substitute that the poor man accepted because he had no choice. She had come to understand it differently. A mule, the product of a Mammoth Jack and a draft mare, was not a poor man's substitute for anything. It was the strongest, most durable, most disease-resistant working animal a farm could own. It ate less than a horse of comparable size. It worked harder in heat. It lived longer. It did not get colic. It did not spook at machinery noise the way horses did. It learned its work once and kept it for 30 years without being retrained. The reason the poor man kept a donkey was not that he had settled for less. It was that the poor man, who could not afford to lose a working animal to colic or heat exhaustion, or the half-dozen other things that killed horses, had made the economically rational choice. The rich man kept horses because he could afford to replace them. The poor man kept what he could not afford to lose. In a drought year with fuel money gone and wheat yields collapsing and farms that needed to keep working to survive, the Mammoth Jack stud operation was not a poor woman's substitute for something better. It was the most useful service anyone in Pratt County was providing. Cal understood this now. He had understood it since October of the first season, the 8th farmer, the breeding log, the arithmetic done in his head at the fence. He had understood it and had kept coming to the west fence every Thursday on the pretext of the drainage channel until November, when the pretext had run out, and the real reason was all that was left. And he had stated the real reason in November in the specific plain language she required, because she did not have patience for things said indirectly. And she had told him to come to supper on Sunday, and he had come at 5:45. 3 years. Some things took as long as they took. The alfalfa had taken a full growing season before it was established. Solomon's reputation had taken a full breeding season before the first offspring were working. The right things, built correctly, proved themselves on their own timeline. She had learned patience from farming. He had learned it the same way, which was one of the things they had in common, and which was more than enough to build on.